Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Wonderhill is either the coolest metaphysical title for a horror film we've ever heard, or the smartest title to hit the corporate motivational market in years, with a subtitle that addresses why success doesn't feel like it should and what to do about it. Whether you've seen her on Good Morning America, The Today Show, The Morning Show, or Fox News, its author, Gassner Otting, is one of today's leading keynote speakers in corporate America. Making her debut with Limitless, How to Ignore Everybody, Carve Out Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life, a Washington Post book list bestseller that was picked by Robin Roberts as one of GMA's favorite books of the year, translated into Arabic, Korean, Turkish, Portuguese, and German. CEO World Magazine, in a cover story, recently reported that Laura inspires people to push past the doubt and indecision that keeps great ideas in limbo by helping audiences think bigger and accept greater challenges that reach beyond their current limited scope of belief. Her advice is undoubtedly precious to CEOs. While Oprah Daily has featured Laura, noting that this tiny mental shift she suggests will help you find your purpose. She's additionally authored Mission Driven, Moving from Profit to Purpose, and joins us today to talk all about her work. Laura, welcome to the show. Well before you were writing them yourselves, what could viewers have found you reading growing up?
I'm sort of a late in life author of books, but I've done a lot of writing throughout my life. So my very first job was writing, in the White House, parts of presidential speeches. And I actually saw that you interviewed my friend Brad Meltzer on this book, and he and I actually worked together there, but we actually know each other back from high school. So that's sort of a funny connection. He walked in the door and I was like, Brad, like, what are you doing here? I think everything that I write about circles around this question of why doesn't success equal happiness? And so much of it is focused on how we were raised and who we were and the inputs we got growing up. So I love that you start with this question. And I think so many of the books that I can remember sort of most vividly from, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, all had to do with characters, sort of like historical fiction characters who just decided that they were not going to accept their lot in life. I wish I could remember the name of the book, but there was one book and I remember exactly where it was in my elementary school library. You walk in and like you turn to the left and the shelf is like right there of historical fiction. And it was this story about this young girl growing up during the Civil War, and she was really pissed that she couldn't be a soldier. And so she like wrapped her body so you couldn't see her shape, and she like went to war. And I remember being like, yeah, we can do anything we want. Right. So I think it's funny that I think the writing that I do sort of comes secondary to the outlook I have on life, which was created by the books that I read.
Who were any teachers in the classroom in high school or college who inspired you down the professional path that you'd follow thereafter?
I had a teacher in 11th grade. His name was Mr. Sessler, Jordan Sessler, and he had us read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And this was 1988. And up until that point, I had been raised by a father who was a very conservative, sort of Reagan Republican type, and a mother who was very progressive. But my dad was like a surgeon. He still is. He's a retired surgeon, and it was. He sort of took up a lot of space in the house. And so I remember right before reading this book, walking around the classroom. I was 17 and all my peers were 18, and I was carrying these register to vote cards, and I was encouraging them to register to vote Republican because I was a Reagan Republican, just like my dad. And then I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and I was like, oh no, I'm actually a progressive, because that book really outlines the beginnings of the labor movement, right, as you know, and sort of in what was happening in these sort of meatpacking factories. And so I would say definitely Jordan Sessler. And then the other teacher I had in, that was 11th grade. In 12th grade was an English teacher named Bonnie Sipe. And I was a very lazy student, Jake. And I was a night owl, mostly because I would stay up at night, like reading books under my covers because I was a big book nerd. And then I would be late to class every single day. I had a first period every single morning. And one morning my phone rang, and I answered the phone, back in the old days, with the wall phone. I crawled into bed, answered the phone. I was like, hello, Laura, this is Mrs. Sipe. Do not be late for school today. So I was like, what? And I hung up the phone. And I remember walking into school kind of dazed and confused. Like, was I dreaming that? And I didn't say anything to her. She didn't say anything to me. And the next morning, ring, ring. Laura, it's Mrs. Sipe. Do not be late for class. And she must have called me every day for like 3 weeks until finally I went up to her and I was like, are you really calling me? Like, is like someone pranking me? Like, what's going on? And she looked at me and she said, Laura, she said, you are a writer. You need to write. Being late to this class is beneath you and it's beneath me and it's beneath the ideas that you're capable of writing. And I'll tell you, Mr. Sessler was the one who made me think that you can be changed by books. And Mrs. Sipe was the one who told me that I should be the one who was writing them. I had a teacher in 11th grade. His name was Mr. Sessler, Jordan Sessler, and he had us read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And this was 1988. And up until that point, I had been raised by a father who was a very conservative, sort of Reagan Republican type, and a mother who was very progressive. But my dad was like a surgeon. He still is. He's a retired surgeon, and it was. He sort of took up a lot of space in the house. And so I remember right before reading this book, walking around the classroom. I was 17 and all my peers were 18. And I was carrying these register to vote cards, and I was encouraging them to register to vote Republican because I was a Reagan Republican, just like my dad. And then I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and I was like, oh no, I'm actually a progressive, because that book really outlines the beginnings of the labor movement, right, as you know, and sort of in what was happening in these sort of meatpacking factories. And so I would say definitely Jordan Sessler. And then the other teacher I had in, that was 11th grade. In 12th grade was an English teacher named Bonnie Sipe. And I was a very lazy student, Jake. And I was a night owl, mostly because I would stay up at night, like reading books under my covers, because I was a big book nerd. And then I would be late to class every single day. I had a first period every single morning. And one morning my phone rang, and I answered the phone, back in the old days, with the wall phone. I crawled into bed, answered the phone. I was like, hello, Laura, this is Mrs. Sipe. Do not be late for school today. So I was like, what? And I hung up the phone. And I remember walking into school kind of dazed and confused. Like, was I dreaming that? And I didn't say anything to her. She didn't say anything to me. And the next morning, ring, ring. Laura, it's Mrs. Sipe. Do not be late for class. And she must have called me every day for like 3 weeks, until finally I went up to her and I was like, are you really calling me? Like, is like someone pranking me? Like, what's going on? And she looked at me and she said, Laura, she said, you are a writer. You need to write. Being late to this class is beneath you and it's beneath me and it's beneath the ideas that you're capable of writing. And I'll tell you, Mr. Sessler was the one who made me think that you can be changed by books. And Mrs. Sipe was the one who told me that I should be the one who was writing them. What drew me to the work that I did was a lot of left turns and right turns and U-turns. I thought I was going to be the first Democratic female senator from the great state of Florida. P.S. Florida still has not had a female Democratic senator, so get on it, Florida. But so that path put me to law school, and I walked in on the very first day of law school and was like, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be a lawyer. But back in the day, this was like Ally McBeal and LA Law, and it seemed really glamorous to be a lawyer. I dated the world's worst boyfriend. And the world's worst boyfriend, I like to joke around, had great taste in precisely two things. The second being unknown presidential candidates from tiny southern states. And so one day he was giving me a ride home from campus, and he was like, Laura, I'm going to stop by this guy's campaign office. He's running for president. I want to pick up his campaign literature. Because again, this is like back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. And we went to this office, and there in the corner was this tiny little black and white TV with then Governor Bill Clinton talking about this idea of service, community service in exchange for college tuition. And I was like, oh, that needs to happen. And I dropped out of law school. I started volunteering on the campaign. He ended up in the White House. I ended up in the White House, and I never went back.
Inc. magazine has spotlighted you as a former presidential appointee in Bill Clinton's White House, which is a pretty cool resume credit to have. What do you feel like in substance you're proudest of that you accomplished while you were there, including writing what we understand were quite a few presidential speeches for Bill Clinton himself?
I spent 4 years helping build AmeriCorps, the National Service Program, which is where Brad and I worked together again. And over, 1.25 million young people have served on that program so far. It's been absolutely fantastic. But 4 years into that, I thought it was time to go back on the campaign trail. And I went to my boss, Eli Siegel, and said, I'm ready. And he was like, well, you're kind of too old to get back on a campaign bus and eat cold pizza and sleep on high school gymnasium floors. And, I was all 25. So like, that's like, ancient in campaign years. And he's like, and you're kind of too young to go be the domestic policy, or sorry, you're kind of too young to be the domestic policy advisor. So go talk to my friend Arnie Miller. He runs the biggest search firm in the country that does exclusively nonprofit executive search, and he'll help find you a job. You'll hide out for 4 years and then come back and do something big on the Gore campaign. And I was like, great. So I went to go talk to Arnie, and about 5 minutes into the interview, I realized that his offices were in Boston. And the guy I was dating at that time, who was not the world's worst boyfriend, but who has become my husband of 25 years so far, and he was about to move to Boston. So I was like, oh, well, I should come work for you. And he said, you should come work for me. And I was like, great, I'll take the job. What do you do? And I became a headhunter.
Good Morning America would feature in their coverage of your first book's release that she writes about the ways to rethink how one measures success. How much of what you were covering topically and these high-profile talks wound up becoming the concept and substance of Limitless? It's how to ignore everybody, carve out your own path, and live your best life.
I didn't take my speeches and put them into the book. I wrote the book, and then I wrote a whole new set of speeches. There are a lot of people in the motivational speaking world who care a lot about, how do I get the standing ovation? How do I tell the joke? What's the bit? What's the good story? And I'm like, yeah, but what's your content? Because people are going to make decisions based on the things they hear you say on stage. And if you don't get that right, that's malpractice. Like, that's just not okay to me. Scott McKain, who wrote the book Iconic, likes to say that those are the speakers who give book reports. They get on stage and they talk about everybody else's ideas. But what have you lived? What have you learned? What have you researched? What have you studied? What do you know is more right than anything else on earth? Like, how do you stand in the center of that excellence and talk about that? So for me, I was doing a lot of talking about this idea of sort of where confidence comes from and how confidence comes from competence, putting one foot in front of the other. And it was, it was doing all right. Like, how do we solve big problems in the world? Like, how do we have confidence in the solutions that we're bringing? And so I called a publisher and I said, I'd really like to do this book. And he said, well, we'd love for you to do your book, but before you do that, we've got this other set of books we're doing. Would you write one of those first? And I was like, I don't know, maybe. In 2007, I wrote a book about how to go from corporate to nonprofit work, mostly because Kaplan Publishing called me one day and just asked me, Merry Christmas, here's your book deal. I had no thought that I was ever going to do it, but they offered me to do it. And he said, if you could just like redo that book in like 20,000 words, like Coffee with an Expert kind of thing. So I was like, fine, that's kind of like the way I'm going to like get him to do my book. Like, okay, I'll play the game. I could do it. So I start writing it and I'm like 6 weeks into it and I'm fighting with the editor, and everything I want to write, she's like, no. And she's like picking at my words and she's picking at my cadence. And, I learned how to write in politics where you write with like speed and energy and, motion and emotion. And she was making it very dry. And finally I called up the publisher and I'm like, listen, I'm not the writer for you. This isn't the book for me. You should fire me. And he said, yeah, I agree. To which I was like, wait, what? Like, I thought you were going to argue with me. And he's like, but there's a bigger idea in this book you're writing, and we should do that one for you in hardback in the spring when big books come out. And I was like, wait, what? Now, that other book that he had noticed was not the original one that I wanted to write for him. He was like, that's not a big enough thing. He said, but there's this idea that you're writing around that I think is the book you want to write. So then I called a friend of mine and I said, I'm panicking. I don't know what to do. And he said, well, what do you want people to feel like after they've read this book? And I said, I'm just so sick of everyone being so limited by everyone else's ideas of who they can be and how they can be and what they can be. And I just want them to ignore all those people already and just make their own way and live their own life. And he said, so you want them to be limitless? You want them to ignore everybody, carve their own path, and live their best life? And I was like, yes. And I was like, I got to go write that book right now. And I kid you not, 6 weeks later, Limitless, How to Ignore Everybody, Carve Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life was done. And it's not because it came out of the keynotes that I was sort of baby giraffing my way trying to like make happen. It was based on 25 years of the career I'd had before. And so when people are like 6 weeks, it took you 6 weeks. And I was like, yeah, it took me 6 weeks to write it, but it took me 25 years and 6 weeks to come up with it. So for me, I needed this sort of the clarity of the publisher saying it's not this, it's that. And then when I had that, I wrote Limitless. And then from Limitless, I had to write the keynote that would go along with it. So I sort of did it the opposite way. I would say that over the course of 20 years of interviewing the most successful people on earth, right? It was my job as a recruiter to call the most successful people, bold-faced names, bold-faced organizations, and recruit them away on behalf of my clients, which sounds like a really hard job until you realize that despite all that success, which is why I was calling them, they weren't very happy, which is why they were calling me back. So I became fascinated by this question of why doesn't success bring happiness? And then I looked at my own career, right? Dropping out of law school to join the Clinton campaign, leaving the White House midway through the 8 years, nobody ever does that. And then leaving the big search firm to start my own, and then selling that search firm when I could just mail it in. I could, walk off into the sunset and be perfectly fine. And each of those times, I'd also had this moment where externally, I seemed very successful, but I wasn't fulfilled, because at every age and at every stage, we change. When you were young, somebody said, hey, pick a path, pick a major, pick a trade. And you were like, okay, great. But when we're that age, we don't have a frontal lobe. Like, we don't actually know how to make good, sound, logical decisions. Like, nobody would have said, like, hey, you're going to record interviews with authors over the internet. That's going to be on an internet, it's going to be on a channel. Like, those things didn't exist when you were that age. So what I realized during that career is that we get success wrong because we're filling everybody else's path to success. And you can't be insatiably hungry for someone else's goal. So whether it's someone telling you to lean in or to hustle harder, or that, you should take this job that doesn't have any risk, or whatever the thing is, it's not going to do it for us. And so what I do in the book is it's sort of 3 sections. The first section, I talk about why we got it wrong, right? Balance and happiness and passion and all the things we're told that we should pursue in these sort of Instagram memes. Then I talk about what I actually did see from people who had both success and happiness, which is this idea of consonance, alignment, flow, and what you do matches who you are, and the 4 things that's made of: calling, connection, contribution, and control, and how to get each of those in how you need them at different points in your life. And then the third part of the book are very specific things that you can do to change your career, change your workplace, or change yourself in order to get more or less of those things as you need them.
What was most exciting about opening that first box of books after the ideas were out of your head, down on paper, and here finally published?
I've watched a lot of authors unbox their books, and they cry and they make a thing. And I was just like, am I going to feel that way? I don't really know. But then I got the books. I actually got them at South by Southwest right before I was gonna give a talk there, and I was sort of speechless, which is kind of funny as a writer. Like, you come up with words. Like, I couldn't come up with any words. And so while I sat there with the camera rolling, just kind of being like, wow, 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 like talking about it, I decided I would open the book to the acknowledgments, and I read the acknowledgments into the camera. And by the end of it, I was kind of a blubbery mess because I felt really proud of this thing that I had done, and it felt really surreal because, like these ideas are sort of in your brain. But for me, I don't think it's magical. Like, I don't think the writing is magical. But if you, like my son is a high school senior, and he designed a set for his most recent school play. And I just sat there in the audience this entire time watching the set, like how the dock comes out of the building and it becomes a car at one point, and all the cool little things he did. And I was like, how did you do that? Like, how do you take these ideas from your brain and make them real? And it seemed magical to me. But writing doesn't seem magical to me because it's a thing that I do. But like creating a physical space or writing a song, my husband will help me change a function on an Excel spreadsheet, might as well levitate me over the ground. But like, writing is no big deal. but reading the acknowledgments, like creating the community around you who uplift and support you in this very solitary endeavor, I don't know, that got me.
It must have been quite something as a veteran of the town to debut at #2 on the Washington Post bestseller book list.
Oh, it's funny. I actually found that out when I was recording an interview with somebody. So it came out on April 4th, but on April 1st, I was listed on the list. And I was doing a live stream podcast with a guy named Eddie Turner. And Eddie's like, man, he's like, and my next guest, she's amazing. She's everywhere. She's all over Washington, D.C., even with Michelle Obama on the Washington Post bestseller list. Laura, welcome to the show. And I was like, what? And so I'm trying to keep it cool, and I'm like Googling myself, like trying to because it's April 1st. Is he pranking me? Like, what's happening here? This is like a theme. I think people are pranking me a lot. And I was like Googling myself, and then I found it. And I was like, well, that can't be real. So then I texted my husband again, the whole time giving this interview and trying to like act like I'm like, oh yeah, it's cool. Everything's fine. Oh my God, honey, did you see this? And I'm trying to figure out how Eddie played this long con on me, that he like set up this page that I would find. So that was like stunning, absolutely stunning, and really wonderful. And I'll tell you, as an absolute no one, I get a lot of play out of being like, she debuted at #2 right behind Michelle Obama. I took that for all it's worth.
As you should. So once you hit the road to begin promoting Limitless, you did so on the highly coveted TEDx speaking circuit, where the seeds we understand were planted for what grew into your next book, Wonderhill, Why Success Doesn't Feel Like It Should and What to Do About It. What were the most powerful points you felt people really connecting to from the talk that then became the foundation for the manuscript that followed? And please share a bit about the amazing organic conversations you began having thereafter, which you identify. Over 100 interviews with superhumans who reveal the truth about success.
What happened with Limitless is after it debuted at #2, I was giving a talk in Vancouver, and I was literally like opening for Malala, which is insane. And to give you a sense of how absolutely professional I am, when I saw Malala backstage, I went up to her and I wanted to thank her for being so professional and all the things that she does in the world. And by the time I got up next to her, I noticed that she was wearing this killer pair of red suede pumps. And literally all I could say to her were, I like your shoes. Because, I'm cool like that, right? Yeah, I like your shoes, Malala. But then we took a selfie. And on the flight home, I was on a red eye, and it was the middle of the night, and I could not sleep. And I was like sandwiched between these like two big dudes, and I was in the center seat. And Malala Friday night, my goddaughter's bat mitzvah Saturday morning. Couldn't miss either one of those. So like I had to be on this red eye. And at 4 a.m, I couldn't sleep anymore. And so I opened up my laptop and I just started writing this screed of a Facebook post. It was something like, it's 4 a.m, or maybe it's 7 a.m, or maybe it's 1 a.m. I have no idea where I am anymore or what I'm doing, but somewhere between the blur that was yesterday and the blur that will be tomorrow is the space I'm in right now. And in this space, I've seen this possibility of who I can be and what I can be. And it's beyond anything I even knew was available to me. I'm in Wonderhill, right? Like, it's sort of wonderful that I could do this incredible thing. It's humbling, it's exciting, it's wonderful. And also, now that I have this potential that I see out in front of me, I feel the burden of it. Can I live into it? Can I live up to it? And I'm filled with anxiety and stress and uncertainty and doubt and imposter syndrome and dread. It's kind of hell also. It's Wonderhill. And I posted this whole long thing about it, and within 15 minutes it had like 100 likes and a bunch of shares, and a bunch of my friends were like, Wonderhill, that's a good word. And another one typed, not for nothing, but wonderhill.com is available for 99 cents. Go buy that URL. And my publisher for Limitless was like, yeah, and by the way, Wonderhill would make a good title for your next book. And so then I did absolutely nothing with it at all, but all of those people planted the seed in my brain that 10 months later, when COVID hit, I was like, I'm in this space. What am I going to do? And so I started just doing this like every day, going live to my community live stream like a bunch of people were doing, just like showing up for people. And after a few weeks of it, I got really sick of my own voice. So I'm like, I'm going to bring other people on. And so I started bringing other people on, and it became a little podcast. And all of our conversations seemed to gel around this idea of this moment when you realize that, like, maybe there is something else out there. Maybe it's okay for you to go for it. And maybe it's all right to embrace who you might become. And that ended up becoming the 100 interviews with glass ceiling shatterers and Olympic medalists and startup unicorns and everyday people like you and me who found themselves in Wonderhill and figured out what to do about it. So it was a book I never intended to write, but by the time I had gotten through 100 of those interviews, I was like, huh, there might be some themes here. From the way that I write is, everyone has their own way of writing. Like some people do morning pages and some people do shitty first drafts. And I tend to write in fairly final form. I mean, a lot of editing goes into, but it's pretty close at that point. But it's mostly because I'm a very fast writer, as I was trained in the White House. You got to, like, he's going to go give a talk in 20 minutes on this thing, like, go, right? So you learn to write pretty quickly, but I think very slowly. So I was talking to Amy Cuddy about this in the beginning of the pandemic. She was doing a little writer's hour thing. And what I said was, the way that I write is like, I walk around the house and I walk around the house and I walk around the house, metaphorically. And if you look into the kitchen, you can see what they're having for dinner. And if you look into the living room, you can see what they're watching on TV. And if you look into the bedroom, you can see what they're up to, right? So you can kind of like understand what the entire house looks like, but from the outside. But it's not until I find like the hook, the story, the thing that I can like run in the front door. And then it's like, I'm like thing one and thing two. I just know where everything is. And it wasn't until I was having a conversation with my friend Rahaf Harfouche, who wrote Hustle and Float and the Decoded Company, that she said, man, she's like, it's kind of like an amusement park. Like, you think it's all going to be so awesome when you get there, right? Success is going to be amazing. And then you get there and it's even harder, right? She's like, the last time I went to an amusement park, like, you think it's going to be amazing. And then it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun is beating down on your shoulders and you're getting a sunburn and like that corn dog in your stomach isn't so happy. And you're like about to get on that roller coaster if you can finally get through that terrible line. And you're like, why am I here? I thought this was going to be fun. And I was like, yes, it's exactly what it is. And she's like, you should make these towns like Imposter Town and Doubtsville and Burnout City. And I was like, and she's like, and there could be a big map and it'd be like, you are here. I was like, yes. And so the book actually ended up being shaped around this idea of an amusement park. And in each of the towns, there are rides. So like every one of the emotions that come with the, uncertainty and the stress and the anxiety and, the bottom falling out from under you or getting knocked off course, right? They're all different rides in the amusement park. So once she said like, oh, it's like an amusement park. And then we spent like an hour jamming on these ideas. It's like all the interviews just slotted into a particular chapter. And it made so much sense.
Now, we have a very exciting first for the show that you're going to share with viewers here, and that we're going to actually be with you when you open the hardcover box of Wonderhill copies and look at them for the first time.
I'm actually going to open this box of books, which is the hardcover of Wonderhill, which is very exciting. All right, well, I'm going to open this box of books. So what is coming next? Gee, I don't know. I got to do the keynote for this, and then there may be another book that's going to come. We'll see. I've got to figure out how this one goes first. But here they are. There it is, my baby. We did a really fun thing where it's like Wonderhill, but you can see the they're all raised like lights. I don't know if you can see that. They're very cool. Oh my God. My last book, Limitless, is yellow. So we did a little Easter egg where the book itself is yellow. How fun. Oh my God, Jake, you're here with me for this moment. And all throughout the book, let's see how it looks. If I can find it. Let's see. There is a map of Wonderhill in here somewhere. Oh, that is the map of all of the different chapters. So there's the information desk Then there's Imposter Town, Doubtsville, Burnout City, and then the conclusion and the acknowledgments and the resources are all in the souvenir shop and overflow parking. Isn't that cute?
Congratulations.
Thank you. Oh my God, thanks for being here with me for that. At the end of each chapter, there's like, are you ready for this ride? they're little questions. And each town has its, there's Doubtsville, each town has its little like pull-out map. That's pretty fun. That's amazing. I haven't seen them together yet. And Limitless is 42,000 words and Wonderhill is 60,000 words. And I was like, oh, it's too long. I don't know, everyone's going to get bored of it. And my editor said, it's your sophomore effort. If people expect something a little hardier, it's okay. But God, that, talk about like, I've got Wonderhill about Wonderhill, like feeling like an imposter. And is it enough? So when I wrote Limitless, I put out like a lead gen where I had an assessment, limitlessassessment.com, where there were like 60 questions. And it's basically all about like what's holding you back and what do you need more of in your life? Do you need more calling, more connection, more contribution, more control? And then how to get it. So that quiz was really long. 25,000 people went to take it and 5,000 people finished. And I learned some very valuable lessons there. The number one is that people don't want to take a 60-question quiz. That's too long, even if it's about them, which is everybody's favorite topic of conversation. Number two, I should ask for the email addresses first, because, that would be much smarter if you're trying to actually build a platform behind your author work. And number three, that you need to know what you're going to do with the data when you get it. And so I had these 5,000, now almost 6,500 responses that I didn't know what to do, because like I mentioned, I like to write. I don't make my living with numbers. My husband does. And so I had to teach myself how to do pivot tables in Excel and all sorts of like Excel spreadsheets to do. And my husband's like standing at the door of my office, like, I could help. And I'm like, no, I want to learn how to do this myself. I'm banging my head against the desk for hours trying to do it. But I actually ended up writing like a 30-page white paper about the findings, about what's actually driving the Great Resignation. So these 5,600 responses from 74 different countries from January 2019, from before, during, and now as we come out of the pandemic. And everybody that I talked to was like, you don't write Wonderhill now, write the Limitless Leader, like write the follow-up to that. But I don't know, I wasn't interested. Like I wrote the 30 pages, I sort of did it. I did that puzzle, I'm done, and Wonderhill was more interesting. So, every time I think about doing a follow-up to something I've already done, I don't know, I feel like I've done that. I feel like I've done that. And maybe if I were writing fiction, like the characters live inside of you in a different way, where like you think about them, if you write about them and when they're 20s, 10 years later, you're like, what would they be like in their 30s? And so like they're living and growing people. So yeah, I don't know. It's probably a much smarter business strategy to write follow-ups to the books you're writing.
Does holding that book and knowing that it's done help to then inspire ideas immediately for the next one?
What's coming up? So I'm going to create a quiz from Wonderhill. So if you're like, gee, I think I might be in Wonderhill, things are great, but also why is it getting harder? I'm going to create a quiz. It'll be at wonderhill.com. And you will take the quiz and it'll tell you what town you're in. Are you in Doubtsville? Are you in Imposter Town? Are you in Burnout City? And it'll actually tell you what ride you just got off of and what ride you're on right now, what ride you're about to get to, and tell you things that you might think about doing to make it a little easier.
After taking these books out on the road between the tour for Limitless and the TEDx talk that thematically inspired Wonderhill, what's been most rewarding for you about seeing readers and listeners taking the material you write about and watching it play productively then in people's lives personally and professionally?
It does not weigh on me that they could be happier and have it lead to success. It weighs on me that may make a decision that'll make them less happy and lead to failure. That weighs on me a lot. I had somebody come up to me in a book signing line once and say, I read the first half of your book and I quit my job. And I wanted to be like, read the second half. Like, I just like, maybe that's the right decision. I don't know. So I've had so many people over the years. I've been so blessed to have so many people reach out to me and tell me how much Limitless helped them, impacted them, enabled them, empowered them. so honored by that. I have not heard from people that it hasn't, but those people aren't going to reach out to me. So I worry about that. And so I worry so much about getting it wrong. I also worry a lot about only posting about my fabulous life as an author and a speaker, and isn't it great? And so I write a lot about, in 2021, I was really, really sick and I wasn't sure if I was going to see 2022. And I write a lot about how hard that was and what it took. And I'm training for my 6th marathon right now, but I also write about the really horrible 4-mile run I did yesterday where I thought I was going to die. Like, it's not always perfection. And so much of what's in my industry at the sort of motivation space is like, yay, everything's perfect. You just have to manifest it. And that's nonsense. And so I try to keep it really real. And I talk about the victories, but I also talk about the work and the uncertainty and the struggle and everything it takes to get there too. And I'm an open book. Like, I mean, authors call me and they want to know how to do it or how to become a speaker. And I'm like, let me tell you everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I feel like I have a responsibility to to my readers, to my followers, to my peers, to my aspirationals. I would rather not do this work than get it wrong for somebody. That is the thing that keeps me up at night for sure. Really, all I'm doing in my nonfiction is I am seeding little, I'm germinating little seeds of imagination about what's possible for them. And it's usually somebody who's picked up my books, picks them up because they want to have a bigger, better, different life. And the only reason they picked up my book is because some part of them believes they can, right? So they already believe it. All I need to do is just kind of like seed that throughout so that by the time I explain to them what the problem really is, like we already have the same shared goal, but by the time I explain to what the problem really is, they realize that it's not the problem they thought it was all along. It's a different problem. And then once I explain that, they're like, oh, okay, then this idea helps me make the change that I want to create. What's fascinating to me is what people take from the book and then tweet about it or put it on Instagram. I spoke at an event that Robin Roberts was also speaking at. Actually, it was the same event. So Malala, it was a 3-event series, and Malala did the first 2, and then she had to go take finals or something because she was like 21. And so Robin Roberts did the 3rd one, and I didn't get to see her, and she's always been a shero of mine. So I did my talk, and then I went to go sign books, and by the time I got backstage, she'd already arrived and was on stage, and I had to leave to catch that flight. And so I said to the MC, oh, like I always wanted to meet her. And he said, well, here, take one of your books, sign it, make it really good, and I'll make sure she gets it. And so I did, and he did. And then I wake up the next morning, and not the night I didn't sleep on, but the morning after that. And I have like a billion messages on my phone. Apparently she read it and like took a photo of it and then posted it on her Instagram and her Twitter with this line, we need to stop giving votes in our lives to people who shouldn't even have voices. And then she hands it to her producer and says, book her, which is how I ended up on Good Morning America. But like, that was like a throwaway line. I'm like, we, shouldn't give votes in our lives to people who shouldn't have voices. And that has gotten reshared and reshared and reshared so many times. So what's really interesting to me are the lines that I worked on so hard that I thought were absolute works of art, get completely ignored. But these like throwaway lines that I didn't even realize had power were the ones that people pick up. So I'm so interested in when I speak, like the things that people retweet, right? The things that actually hit people, because we write for a specific audience. Like we think we know who our audience is, and then we learn so much about them by seeing what they actually listen to. And when I was writing Wonderhill, I did a lot more sort of testing of some of the ideas ahead of time, because now I know that that's something I didn't know that the first time. So it's that to me is really interesting, just to see like what actually lights people up from what I wrote. And like I said, getting it right. The content is really important.
Finally, before we go, there are a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners out there thinking about writing their first book. What guidance would you give them that worked for you when you were first trying your hand at the stream?
I mean, I love the always be writing. I use Scrivener, so I have all the little chapters and all the sections already lined up. Some of those sections are easier to write than others. So if I'm stuck on one that's really hard, I'll go to one that's easy. But also some days the words just don't come. Like the words are there, fickle mistresses. And they just, for me, some days they just don't come. Some days they decide to come at 4 a.m. I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, that's how I should tell so-and-so's story. Got it. And then I'm like, I'll remember that in the morning. And then of course I don't. And then it's like, oh. So if I wake up at 4 a.m. and the words are there, I'll just write them down. I'll do it. But I would say always be talking. Like nobody has writer's block, or sorry, people say I have writer's block, but like nobody has talking block. Like we could talk forever. So like get a bunch of people that you know who also might be writing. When I was going through the meat of the writing, we had like a 10 a.m. every day. We had a 10 a.m. Zoom window, and there was a bunch of writers, and sometimes I'd be the only one that showed up, and sometimes 12 people would show up. But you always knew that someone might be there. So like you open up your Zoom and we would just sit, and it was like, you just see people's like, eyeballs, and you're just like sitting there typing. You had to have the camera on, which was super awkward, but it meant that you were there writing. And if we had trouble, there was always like a moment in the call where it's like, okay, who wants to talk out some idea? So by the time you've sort of talked out the idea, you've kind of figured it out. So I think, yeah, always be writing, but also always be talking, always be wording. Amy Cuddy said to me when we were talking about like how we write, that conversation I alluded to earlier, she said, I don't believe in morning pages. I don't write every day, but I think about writing every day. And not just like, I think I should be writing, but she thinks about what she thinks about her stuff every day. So she's like turning it over in her head over and over and over again, so that by the time she sits down to write, like me, like she finds the front door and then it's there. So I like always be wording is what I would say.
Laura, we had so much fun talking today. Thank you so much for taking our time to be on About the Authors TV.